Well, so far, Hume has mostly been offering us a kind of model of human psychology. He's been telling us about how the contents of our mind can be divided up into categories and how those contents can be related to one another. And what he's going to do in section 4 now is he's going to introduce a problem that emerges basically just from the psychology that we have described so far. So if we understand human minds the way that Hume has described them so far, that's going to lead naturally to a certain problem that's going to be described in section 4. And then Hume is going to go on later in the inquiry to try to solve that problem. This problem is going to be expressed in section 4. I'm going to present it to you as expressed in a series of theses, okay? And that each of the theses, there will be some arguments he'll offer in support of them, but I'm going to focus on kind of like the sequence of theses, because it's that sequence of theses that gets us to the problem, gets us into the problem. So the first thesis is, Hume says, all knowledge that we have is a knowledge either of relations between our ideas, or it's a knowledge of what he calls matters of fact. So the idea here is, and what Hume is imagining when he says this, is that some knowledge is a matter of looking inside our own minds and seeing that the ideas that we have, which again are based on impressions, are related to one another in certain patterns that mean that we can very confidently assert some things to be true. And so Hume thinks that mathematical claims, like the claim that 2 + 3 = 5, is a case of relations between our ideas, or the claim that a square can be divided by a single line in such a way that one produces 2 triangles, right? So you can carry out that procedure in your mind. That's a relation between ideas that you have, between a straight line and a square and triangles. Those ideas are related in a certain way, which you can discover just by examining the contents of your own mind. This kind of knowledge is such that if you were to contradict it, that is, or if you were to deny it, if you were to say, it's not true that a square has one more side than a triangle does, for instance. Or if you were to say, it's not true that 2 + 3 = 5. Ultimately, by looking at other ideas that you have about 2 and 3 and 5, ideas that we share about 2 and 3 and 5, you'd be able to see that there's a contradiction in there somewhere. So denying a relation of ideas is basically incurring a self-contradiction. One ends up saying something that completely doesn't make sense, or believing something that completely doesn't make sense, if one denies this kind of knowledge, a relation of idea kind of knowledge. Matters of fact, on the other hand, are claims about things outside of our minds. Okay, matters of fact, this is the kind of knowledge that's had in like biology or in physics. If the claim is that a dog is a mammal, or the claim is that mammals bear live young, or the claim is that China is north of Thailand. Any of these are claims about the ways that things are outside of our minds. They're not just claims about relations between our ideas. And knowledge of matters of fact are distinct from knowledge of relations of ideas in that one can deny claims about matters of fact without incurring a contradiction. So one can say, well, some mammals don't bear live young, as is actually true, for instance, about the platypus. Or one can say, actually, the books that have been written about this are lying. Not all of China is north of Thailand, okay? Whether the claims about those claims about matters of fact are true or false, it doesn't incur a contradiction. It's not something that's like inherently illogical to say that Thailand is north of China or China is south of Thailand. Okay, the example that Hume gives is the claim that the sun won't come up tomorrow. Okay, so yeah, we believe the sun will come up tomorrow, but it's not a logical contradiction to say that the sun might not come up tomorrow. Why might the sun not come up tomorrow? Maybe an asteroid will hit the Earth and knock it off of its course. Okay, an enormous asteroid. Maybe there's some kind of enormous explosion in space and the Earth dissolves. So it's possible that the sun will not come up tomorrow. It's not inherently self-contradictory. It's not inherently illogical to say that the sun may not come up tomorrow or the sun won't come up tomorrow. It might be wrong, it might be incorrect, and tomorrow we'll find out that it's incorrect. But it's not like saying that 2 plus 3 doesn't equal 5. Saying 2 plus 3 doesn't equal 5 involves a logical mistake, whereas saying that the sun won't come up tomorrow involves a mistake about a matter of fact, but it's not a logical mistake. It's not something where we're inherently self-contradictory just by believing it. So a question at this point is, do you agree with this? Is it true that all of our knowledge is one of these two kinds, and that a denial of relations of ideas is self-contradictory? Do you agree with those theses? Hume's next big point is that all matters of fact, or knowledge of matters of fact, I should say, is based on knowledge of cause and effect. We don't have any beliefs about the way that things are out in the world, Hume thinks, except by reasoning from cause and effect, thinking that we, for instance, are perceiving an effect of a certain cause. He gives some examples. So he says, say we believe that our friend is in France. We believe that, for instance, because we've received a letter from our friend who tells us they're having a great time in France. Okay, well, we believe that they're there because of that letter. We think that the letter coming to us and having the writing that it has in it is an effect of their being in France, that they wouldn't have written the sentence, I'm having a good time in France, if they weren't in France writing that sentence. So we infer that they really are in France not from seeing them in France directly, but just from reading their letter. Another example he gives is if we found a watch on an island, just a pocket watch with all of the mechanisms of a watch, the hands moving across the face, we would infer that that had been produced by some person, some human being. We wouldn't think there's any other way that a watch could come to exist, except that it had been made by a human being. Another example he gives is if we hear some words spoken, like a sentence spoken in the dark, we infer that it's a person speaking the words. We don't see the person if it's completely, say, pitch black dark. We don't see the person, but if we hear human words, we think it's a person there. Now, today, maybe we're in a different world because of computers. We might think, okay, maybe it's Alexa talking to us or something. But at the time Hume was writing, there weren't such things. So that's the inference. Now, it's not that we always get these things right. Hume's point is just that we wouldn't be able to say anything about matters of fact if we weren't willing to infer on the basis of what we perceive to be certain effects, that there's some cause of those effects out in the world. And at this point, I'll ask you again, do you agree with that? Does that make sense to you, that all of our beliefs about what exists out in the world ultimately is based on some idea we have about our experiences being produced by something out in the world? That if we weren't willing to believe that our experiences were an effect of something outside of the world affecting us, that there's no way that we would be able to have any knowledge of what's happening out in the world, or of any matter of fact, as he describes it. And at this point, Hume asks, well, what is our knowledge of cause and effect based on? And, if our knowledge about matters of fact, about what exists out in the world, is based on knowledge of relations between causes and effects, what is our knowledge of relations between causes and effects based on? And Hume's answer here is it seems to be based on experience. That is, that in the past, when we've seen, when we've seen people write letters, and we've ourselves written letters, and we think that for the most part, when people write letters, they are telling the truth in what they're writing. So because of that experience of having seen people do it before, we infer that this letter we've received from our friend is actually from our friend who's in the place where they say that they're in. Another example, maybe a little bit clearer, is we've never seen a watch arise out of nowhere, or anything as complicated as a watch, any kind of mechanical object like that. But we have lots of experience with human beings making watches, repairing watches. We've seen human beings make and repair other kinds of mechanical things like that. So it's our past experience of having seen that complicated mechanical objects like that are always made by people that leads us to believe, in this case, when we find a watch on the island, that it must have been made by people too. So again, the point of going through those examples is to say, or is to try to provide some examples to clarify what Hume means when he says that our knowledge of cause and effect is based on experience. Beliefs about cause and effect are beliefs that say when there's smoke, when there's a fire, then there's smoke. When there is a fire, there is heat, right? So we think that the heat is produced by the fire. We think that the smoke is produced by the fire. This belief in causes and effects has to come from somewhere. The knowledge has to be based on something. We are not just born, for instance, we're not just born innately knowing that fire will burn us. We're not born innately knowing that fire produces smoke. We learn that fire will burn us, that fire produces smoke, from experience, from either seeing other people get burned or ourselves getting burned a little bit, from seeing fires and always seeing smoke in accordance with the fires. So our belief in those connections is based on experience. The simple way to put it is just the way it's put on the slide. All knowledge of cause and effect is based on experience, by which Hume means past events of experiencing two things going together, causes and effects going together.